In the room, I do know, but for those who don't know me, it's pretty unusual for me to be sitting up here. I think probably being the person who's supposed to be representing the state in this discussion. Up until I've worked for the state for less than a year. Before this, a year ago, I was sitting as one of the juvenile justice advocates in some of these reform groups in terms of what we should be doing with juvenile justice in California. I worked for a couple years before that for the legislature, for Senator John Burton. And I think it was during that time that I remember reading Jerry Miller's book, Last One Over the Wall. And when I started this job, I put that book away. And I thought to myself, I'm not going to look at this book until I'm done. And for those of you who've read the book, you probably understand why. In that book, he talks about how hard what he did was. And if I recall correctly, in that book talks about the fact that he's not sure whether or not he would do it again, and not sure whether or not it could be done again. And I think when Dan first talked to me about participating in this conference, one of the things that was exciting about me was the ability to take this discussion today beyond the superficial issues that we sort of get in the sound bites and be able to really talk somewhat in a dialogue in terms of what can actually be done. So I hope that we can do that either through the discussion this morning, lunch, and some of the discussions later this afternoon. In terms of, Lenore asked me to speak just a little bit on what has happened at the state level in terms of trying to address this reform. As Sarah pointed out, the consent decree was filed a little over a year ago in November of 2004. And at that point, the governor went out to Chad. That was unprecedented for a governor to be at a youth correctional facility and demonstrating a commitment to reforming juvenile corrections in California. It was shortly after that that I came on board, and I came on board because I believed that there was a window of opportunity here in California that we might not see again, and I decided that I wanted to be a part of it. On a personal note, will let you all know that I check in every day with myself and see if I still, in fact, think that reform is possible, and am I still perceiving my job as being part of the solution, or has it become a part of the problem? I'm still here, but I'll keep checking in. So I think that it's a tough job, and there's no underestimating that. There are a number of people in the audience who have gotten to work with over the past year or two, right in line of sight, who spent decades trying to make significant change possible. And I think we're all at a point of wondering, you know, how long will this window be open, and how wide is it going to stay open while we can jump through, and not just out. So when the consent decree was filed in November, what the state had agreed to, and I think it is important to understand this, was there were 6 different expert reports at that time. There was one on education, mental health, health care, disability, sex behavior treatment, and then one that was known as general corrections. And what the state had agreed to do was to file individual remedial plans in each of those 6 different subject matter areas. At that time, those reports were going to be due in January of 2005, so just a few months away. But as Sarah pointed out, while the consent decree was filed in November, the history of the case did go back earlier than that. I started in December, and one of the first things that I was asked to do was set up some trips to other states around the country so that we could go visit some other juvenile justice systems. And we did, over the course of the next few months, visit Missouri, we visited Texas, we visited Washington State, Colorado, and Florida. And we picked some of those states because they were known to have juvenile justice model programs, and then we picked some of those states because they were large and they had populations that were somewhat comparable to ours. As you all know, no one is exactly comparable to our state in terms of the age of the population, the levels of violence, and the lengths of stay, and so on. But our focus in each of these states was on the programs that focus specifically on the serious and violent offenders or the offenders who have serious mental health issues. And we went on these trips with the prison law office. We went with the special master in the lawsuit, with the inspector general, as well as the leadership from CYA at the time. And when we came back from those trips, and in fact even before we completed those trips, what we realized was that the change that was needed was far more overarching than what was going to be dealt with in those 6 individual remedial plans. That we were making a huge mistake by dealing with the education system as if it was separate from the mental health system, as if it was separate from the medical care system, as if it was separate from what we provided for sex offenders, that all of this needed to be looked at comprehensively and that we needed to have an overarching plan. The plaintiffs agreed with this, and so instead of filing all the remedial plans in January, we filed a stipulated agreement in which the state agreed to provide those remedial plans over the course of the next 10 months.